welcome everyone to the National Civic League's first webinar of the new year, Bridging Divides Through Community Dialogue. My name is Rebecca Trout, and I am the Program Director of the All-America City Awards and Communications here at the League. We are a 125-year-old nonprofit, and we aim to advance civic engagement to create more equitable and thriving communities. One of the ways we do that is through our flagship program, the All-America City Awards. The All-America City Awards began in 1949 to recognize outstanding civic engagement in local communities, and we're still going strong. This year's theme is building equitable and resilient communities. We are in the throes of the application process. Those are due on February 10th this year. There's still time. If you are considering, just shoot me an email and I'll be able to send you resources and answer any questions. In that application, we ask for you to show your community's commitment to equity and resilience by presenting 3 projects that focus on community engagement, collaboration, inclusiveness and equity, impact, and innovation. Again, I encourage all of you to apply for that this year. We will be accepting applications up until the 10th, and I'm happy to answer any questions. I'll also, in today's follow-up email, be sending you additional information about the award. But for today, we are focusing on bridging divides through community dialogue. As I'm sure you all are aware, we inaugurated a new president yesterday, and I actually just want to share a brief quote from his speech because I think it is really relevant to our conversation today. So he said, "We can join forces, stop the shouting, and lower the temperature. For without any unity, there is no peace. Only bitterness and fury, no progress, only exhausting outrage." So today's speakers will likely point out that we're far from unity and it's not going to happen overnight. And there's going to be a significant period of reconciliation and healing that happens before we get there. But I think it's a really good goal to keep held in our minds. So with that framing in mind, I'd like to jump into the webinar by introducing today's 3 keynote speakers. First up, we will be hearing from Courtney Breeze. She is the Executive Director of the National Coalition for Dialogue and Deliberation. Then we will hear from John Saruf, who is the Co-Executive Director and Director of Program Development at Essential Partners. And then we will finally hear from Hollie Cost, who is the former mayor of Montevallo, Alabama, and a professor of special education at the University of Montevallo. Before I hand it over to Courtney, a couple of housekeeping items. We are recording today's session. You will be sent a follow-up email, which will include a recording as well as the slides and some additional resources. We do ask that everyone remain on mute throughout the remainder of today's webinar to cut down on dogs barking, or any other background noise. But we will have a Q&A at the very end of the session, so you can type your questions into the chat box or use the raise hand feature, and I will unmute you so you can ask your question directly. So now, without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to Courtney Breeze. Courtney, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thank you, Rebecca. It is so awesome to see all of you and be here with you all today. Let me just pull up just a couple images I'm going to share with you. So today's session is all about how we can use community dialogue to bridge divides. And that is essentially what I've had the pleasure of working with the National Coalition for Dialogue and Deliberation Network for a little over 10 years now. The National Coalition for Dialogue and Deliberation, also known as NCDD, which is much easier to say, is a network of 700 individuals and organizations across the country. That's what you're seeing on your screen right now, is a little map that shows our membership. And these are all folks in various capacities, including government, higher education, nonprofits, private consultants, volunteers, who are really committed to helping people have better conversations and make decisions on issues that are important to them. So I'm here basically to kind of just talk to you about this moment that we're in and also share some resources with you. And then I'm going to hand it over to our other presenters who have some great insights and stories to share. So amongst our network is a bunch of folks who really believe that there is plenty of opportunity at this moment in time, but always for dialogue to help us come together. If we think about this moment we're in, certainly I think for most folks, the last several years have felt like a certain level of extreme divisiveness. And I would say in particular, the last several weeks have really highlighted just how extreme that can feel and look. But if we think about our country's history, at least over the past 20 years or so, there's been this kind of undertone of division that's really been ramped up by our national politics. At the same time, folks that are in the Dialogue and Deliberation Network have really been doing fantastic work at local levels, state levels, and in some cases, national levels to help bring people together, because what we find is that the opportunity for people to connect and talk about what matters most to them is a huge opportunity to really get out of this cycle that we find ourselves in so often, where everything seems to be on polar ends and things are very centered on argument and debate. So dialogue is a way that we can do a lot of great things. So I want to highlight for you all just briefly a couple of our member organizations and the information and resources that are available to you. Certainly, if you go to our website, which is ncdd.org, and specifically our resource center, which you can get to from that main page there, you'll find a wealth of resources that are available to you for free for a variety of types of conversations, topics, and so on. We really try to make as much accessible to anyone who's interested in trying to have these conversations because it is so important right now. But in addition to what we have available, we have some fantastic member organizations, loads of fantastic member organizations, but I'm going to highlight a couple briefly that I think have some particularly useful resources or programs that can be of use to folks who are looking for opportunities right now. So one of them is Essential Partners, which John is going to be talking about in just a couple minutes. So I'm going to let him share, but really just want to, again, kind of boost them up as an organization that really focuses on creating those human connections that can really help us get past those deep divisions. We also have some fantastic organizations. You may have heard of Make America Dinner Again. They've gotten some good press in the past. Similar organizations have popped up as well, like the People's Supper and Civic Dinners, where folks are giving the public tools that they can use to bring people together in their community. Most of these were kind of formed around the idea of bringing people together over dinner. Obviously, with the pandemic these days, they've also found ways to kind of adjust that to this online space. In addition to that, Living Room Conversations is another organization that has fantastic resources really kind of keyed into and specific to some of these key issues that we're facing right now, including just talking about political divides. Resetting the Table is another one that I just want to point out because it has, that organization has created a film called Purple. It's a short film that shows the work that they've been doing to bring people together across a spectrum of political views, to have conversations where they can really connect with one another as fellow community members and explore some of these important topics with that kind of lens. They also have some great resources that you can tap into for viewing the film and having a conversation that really mirrors what you see in the film. And then finally, just one other one that I'll mention is Conversation Cafe, which is a very simple, very elegant little conversation model that anyone can pick up and use. Everything is open source and on their website, for having a conversation on basically just about any topic. Really focuses on encouraging listening and encouraging understanding of one another. So loads of things out there that you all can use as you look at how can we help our communities, how can we help create community cohesion, which I think is a key part of where we are right now, kind of helping bring our neighbors back together, as well as looking at the important topics of the day. I see someone mention Braver Angels, also a great organization. There are so many, and only a little bit of time, so I'm just going to highlight a few. One other thing that I want to mention to you all, as we were preparing for this webinar, we were talking a bit about what are some of the community resources and partners that are out there. And so I just wanted to highlight briefly, NCDD has been doing work with the American Library Association over the past 5 years or so on their Libraries Transforming Communities initiative. And so, most of you thinking about kind of how do we do this? Who do we partner with? How do we make it happen? I just wanted to remind you all that libraries are a key partner in the community. And so many of them are out there right now looking at how they can kind of serve in this way of bringing people together, really kind of convening some of these community conversations. Libraries across the country have been getting training and skill building in how to both organize and facilitate conversations in their communities. And so there's a great opportunity out there for you all to think about hooking up with your library as you think about initiatives to help have community conversations that can help bridge divides. So I am going to leave it at that because I think that's kind of a brief overview of where we are and what some of the opportunities are. I'm going to hand things back over to Rebecca and we'll hear from John in a moment.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Courtney, for just setting the table about where we are and some of the existing organizations and resources that have been doing the work of dialogue and deliberation for a really long time. And with that, we are going to hear from one such organization. John, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you so much for the opportunity, Rebecca. Thanks for everyone for being here. Thank you to NCDD, Courtney, for all that you've done over the years to highlight this community of practitioners and organizations doing this. I'm going to share my screen. And so talk a little bit about building culture and capacity for bridging divides. So the first thing I want to do is ask you all as leaders this question. Does your community have enough strong, trusting relationships across difference to be inclusive, dynamic, and creative in the best of times, and to resist polarization, demonization, and violence in the worst of times? And do you know who to turn to in your community to gather people for creative, connected conversations when decisions need to be made, or to envision an inclusive future in the best of times, or when conflict arises that threatens to divide you, leading to disaffection, stalemate, or violence in the worst of times? Those are the questions that when we go into communities, we ask, because a community is only as strong as its ability to live across difference. I think one of the things that we have done so well in our country, in many places and in our institutions, is to think about diversity and how do we bring more people into communities in diversity. Have we thought enough about how to help us live into the fullness of that diversity? As the late, great Representative Elijah Cummings said, diversity is not our problem, it is our promise. And it is with Elijah Cummings and this story that I'll just tell a little bit about how we work, and a project that started in Columbia, Maryland. It was after 2016 and the continued fraying of relationships, Elijah Cummings went to the faith leaders in Columbia, Maryland, and said to them, not unlike what Courtney said about libraries, you faith leaders, you interfaith clergy are a place that needs to take up the cause of bridging differences in our country. He was seeing our relationships fray. He was seeing violence in the streets and was saying we need to build relationships strong enough to hold our communities together and to begin to dismantle the structural causes of racism and bias and discrimination in our communities. And that group of people got together and decided to train, 6 congregations got together, trained 40 facilitators the first year. Those 40 facilitators held conversations all over the community for 4 sessions in a row and culminated in a big celebration, after which groups formed to continue to talk and work. And the next year they wanted to come back. And in the best of times, it was about that community collaborating to talk about school schedules and how to honor the many different religions in Columbia and Howard County, so that holidays could be celebrated in schools for all of the different faiths. In the worst of times, after the shooting in Pittsburgh at the Tree of Life Center, when Reverend Susan Grossman, who is when Rabbi Susan Grossman, who is the rabbi at the synagogue and part of the leadership team of this, held a vigil, she had to hold 2 vigils, one inside to standing room only inside her synagogue, and then one outside to people assembled in the parking lot, because people from around that community came out to honor the relationships they had built, to say, we will not have that kind of violence in our community. We will stand together with you and mourn with you and hold you in this time. So what can we do in the best of times? What can we do in the worst of times? And this year, again, this is the 4th year, we'll be working with them, 55 congregations of all faiths, and not just congregations, but community centers will join again in Columbia. They now have 110 facilitators trained. They have the capacity. They know who to turn to when something happens, and they turn to each other, so that when there's a conversation that needs to be had in the Methodist Church, they turned to their fellow facilitators to come in and support them in having those difficult conversations. Our mission, our vision at Essential Partners is to equip people to live and work better together in community by building trust and understanding across differences. And we envision a world of thriving communities that are strengthened by their differences and connected by trust. When our differences are our strength, we know that we are in a dynamic, creative place in the best of times. We are in a resilient place in the worst of times. So I'll just say a little bit about where we are in this moment of polarization. What's going on in our communities right now? This is what we look at. And when a community is dynamic and thriving, and when it is creative and working, there are people at the bottom of this graphic here. You see them with all their different colors. They come from different experiences, different identities, different beliefs. They share time in the choir together. Their kids play on the soccer team together. They volunteer at the food pantry together. They are part of the Chamber of Commerce together. They may be very different in their political beliefs. They may be very different in their identities, but they come and go and share in different parts of the life of a community. And that kind of dynamic community is what allows a community to thrive. when a threat comes into the system, and that could be a decision that needs to be made, or it could be an incident that happens, people can get into interest groups. Now, we're a democracy. People get into interest groups because they want to advocate for something. And we believe very strongly that advocacy and marching and protesting and all of those things are good and important parts of our democracy. But there are impacts of an increasing level of polarization, which is that we minimize the differences within our group and we maximize the differences across our group, which makes it harder to dissent within our own group of friends and colleagues and our own interest group. And it makes us begin to exaggerate who they are in a community. Now, after an election, the yard signs should come up out of the ground, get put away, and we go back to collaborating at the school play, collaborating, making sure that trash is picked up around our community, or writing a grant together for a playground. What happens when we don't have that level of dynamic flexibility is that we go further up the polarization graphic. We become opponents of one another. We become enemies of one another. We begun to stereotype one another, create slogans, blame other people for all the problems in our community. We begin to see the other people as having hidden agendas. You begin to see the kinds of activities that we're seeing in our country now with conspiracies and conspiracy theories about other people, and seeing everybody who identify as one single group as having all of the qualities that we dislike. We become enemies, and polls show that over and over again, that we have seen the kind of creating of enemies within our own countries, within our own neighborhoods. How do we get out of that? How do we break that pattern? Well, dialogue and deliberation, inclusive conversations is one way to bring people back down into their experiences in their communities, seeing the other identities that we care about, the other beliefs that we care about. What happens in conflict is that it flattens us. Somebody becomes just a Republican or just a Democrat, just a believer of this faith or that, when we know that we are full of far more than that. So there's a possibility to do this in our civic life. We do this with grassroots organizations, journalists. We do this with people in city councils. We do this, and I'm going to give one quick example of this in my own town. We saw my own town here in Gloucester, Massachusetts, on the North Shore of Massachusetts, was in a place where we were tearing ourselves apart over every decision that we had to make. Going into factions, writing letters, nasty letters about one another in the newspaper, online. A group of us got together and said, we have to do better than this. And we trained with essential partners to train up a group of facilitators to be able to hold those difficult conversations in new ways. And we started with things like public art and public art policy, and what we're going to do with our schools. And so in the best of time, when the library is envisioning a new library and needs to hear the voices of everyone in the community, they can call on Gloucester Conversations, trained by essential partners, to hold space to vision that. And in the worst of times, when a community day homeless shelter is being threatened by a disagreement between the homeless shelter and the neighborhood, and a big public hearing about it explodes, they know who to call. City councilor knows and says to another city councilor, go talk to Gloucester Conversations. They've been trained. They know how to hold space. And now what we see is that homeless day shelter collaborating with its neighbors, holding their own ongoing conversations and thriving. They have the tools, they know who to reach out to, they have the relationships. We've been doing it with race and policing in communities in North Carolina, activists and officers being trained to be facilitators or holders of space in their own community. We see it in high schools and middle schools. People who are at the beginning of their civic life, learning how to engage in politics and being dynamic in that, learning how to be civic leaders, holding space, not just for each other, but for their teachers and for parents, and conversations about what happens in schools and school policy, about masks and about vaccines. Middle school and high schoolers can be places where we can leverage talent to be part of our bridge building force in our country. Faith institutions we've already talked about. Faith institutions are one of those places that still hold a key role of holding the soul of a community, the fabric of a community together. Were that there was a chief social fabric officer in every city and town in our country, there isn't. So who, like librarians, like Courtney was saying, who can help hold that space? Who can be trained? So where to start? When you're looking for this, look for something that's adaptable and scalable. It has to be flexible enough to adapt to your community and context, and replicable enough to go to scale. This has to have impact beyond just a few conversations, has to be able to reach your whole community. Make sure that as you're building this capacity, that you're bringing in voices from all around the community. Often people will say, well, we did a dialogue, but the people that we wanted there didn't show up. Were the people that you wanted there part of the planning of that conversation? Were their voices included? Was it a conversation that was about them, from them? Interviewing stakeholders, custom design. For us, the community is the expert of the community, right? Whoever comes into your community to help you with this should be listening to you first and what it is you need, what it is you care about. Train and design conversations for you. Build capacity that stays in the community. We go into lots of communities and we facilitate difficult conversations for them. But our work that we want to be doing, and the work that's going to change this country and change it community by community, is when your people are trained to hold it themselves. My colleague is fond of saying this is not the first difficult conversation you've had, not the first conflict you've had, and it won't be the last. Do you have what it takes to hold that conversation going forward? And one of the things that we offer and that we're trying to build right now is membership into a global community of practice, where you are learning from each other as participants in this, where one community is going to another community and help setting up a dialogue program and meeting together, learning together, and where we offer resources as an ongoing way to continue to better our practice and see ourselves as bridge builders. This is measurable. It's possible to do. People find greater trust in after conversations with each other. They want to be heard and engage across differences. They find new relationships that allow them to resist the pull to polarization. So I go back to my early questions, and as we close out, does your community have strong, trusting relationships across difference to be inclusive, dynamic, and creative in the best of times, and to resist polarization, demonization, and violence in the worst of times? Who are your bridge builders and healers? Train them now. That's all. Back to you, Becca.
Thank you so much for that, John. I think there was a particular interest in the self-perpetuating graphic around polarization. I'm sure we'll be taking some questions on that. Also, something that we drive home as well is the need to co-create conversations with the folks that you would like to see there. So two really important things to pick out from that. And then you teed us up perfectly for Hollie's presentation about wanting to share and help one another have these conversations. And Hollie has had the experience with some of these dialogues in her community, and she's going to share her experience with that now.
Wow, you are exactly right, Rebecca. He did tee me up. I have the distinct privilege of following these two national superstars, so thanks a lot. I really did appreciate this, and I appreciate just being invited to this presentation. It's not often that a town in the middle of Alabama, very small town in the Deep South, gets invited to participate in such an incredibly impactful conversation with folks from all over the country. So thanks a lot. And we are going to talk about bridging these divides through community dialogue in the Deep South. So really what I'm going to talk about is where the rubber meets the road. And I thought it would be important to start by telling you a little bit about our little unconventional oasis. We are in the geographic center of the state of Alabama, and you see all of the great people that we have here, just the beautiful spirits. On the top, these are our high school students on a Peace Studies Day. And then on the bottom, the photograph is of our junior city council. We are a very leaderful community, and these students, these youth are really some of our strongest leaders. So I'll be referencing them throughout the presentation, but you see our mission, I think, is fairly unique. Just real quickly, these are some of our census facts. And I thought it was important for you to get a picture of who we are in this respect as well. We have just under 7,000 individuals in our population. We're very diverse racially here. That's not listed, but actually in the schools, the Caucasian students are the actual minority in the schools. We have the highest percentage of Hispanic students in the county, and then a large percentage of African American students as well. What you'll also notice is that we have a high rate of poverty, about 20% here. We are actually the most impoverished city in the wealthiest county in the state of Alabama. We reside in Shelby County. But, or shall I say, and we are recognized very frequently for some pretty high accolades. You'll see here, we've been designated a community of excellence. We've received many state recognitions and national recognitions for Main Street. And then again, our junior city council, I'm very proud of them. They received the Civvy Award a few years ago. So we got to travel to DC with a group of kids. So it was a lot of fun hanging out with teenagers, myself, and two other chaperones there, but it was wonderful. I was really proud of them. And much like my colleagues, we do have several assets here. We're going to talk about partnerships as well, but we are unique in the fact that we do have so many assets in a 12.5 square mile area of the community. So when we're looking at this, what you see is we're a great arts community. We have just local artists here because of our public liberal arts university. We're the only public liberal arts university in the state of Alabama, so we have huge assets here. We're very focused on sustainability, and we have the American Village here. We also have the David Matthews Center for Civic Life, and they do much of the work similar to Essential Partners in that they do bring individuals together around just some difficult and challenging issues, and that's what brought me into this world. So I owe them a great deal of credit for some of our successes in the city. These are some other partners that we've had in our community that have really helped to build a leaderful community. The Kettering Foundation has engaged us in a community politics exchange that I'll talk about shortly. We are a Main Street community. There are only a few in the state of Alabama, and we're very proud of that. And the Aspen Institute worked with us to look at our education in our community from cradle to career. We also did some work with the Equal Justice Initiative that we'll be talking about as well. And then we're very closely linked with our League of Municipalities. And so we appreciate the support we've gotten in many different respects. And of course, we had to put the National Civic League there. So thank you so much for being a part of us. Now I've been asked to talk a little bit about the recent political climate. And this is a little touchy because I will be naming names and I will be talking about some real stories that are very powerful and a little hurtful in some respects. So I want to start with the good, the bad, and the ugly, literally. And I like to start with the good. And the good is we do have these great recognitions. And if you see this photograph here on the top left, you'll see that we have this beautiful, amazing downtown that we have just renovated. Over the last couple of years, we've completely renovated our main street. We've paved all of our streets. We have new lighting. We have a fully accessible downtown. It's just really charming and beautiful. And that is because of all of the work that we did together as a community. I had the great fortune of being the mayor during this, but there were other leaders before me who worked together to lay this foundation. And then I had the privilege of really seeing it come to fruition. And people say it's a thankless job. It is not a thankless job. I loved being the mayor for 8 years. I really did. And I didn't leave because I hated it. I left because I wanted to do other things and I wanted to leave while I still loved it. So got this really nice note on social media. Social media can be used for good, from Jan. And she was just thanking me for everything that I've done. But I always recognize it's never just me. We have a whole team that works hard, and I always am quick to say that. So I may get some accolades that I don't deserve because it's a team effort. And I actually see a few of my colleagues on this webinar now. So now we get to the bad, and these are bad comments. And social media, you see things out there all the time, and people think that they can just sit behind and be the keyboard warriors, and words can hurt. Luckily, I have very thick skin, but unluckily, this individual who put this first quote up here is actually running for a state office right now. And I did redact the names. Even though this is all public information, I think it's in poor form to just put these things out there. So this is something, the her here is me. And it was very obvious it was me from other things on the thread. There are things that are untrue in there, and that's just bad. It wasn't nice. Our last election, and really that's what brought me to the phone call, I think, because we ended up on the front page of the New York Times, and that's the ugly part. But our last election was very unusual in that we had a coalition of individuals who banded together and they ran really on a ticket. And it's bad because the beauty of municipal elections is that it's nonpartisan. I loved the fact that I could be the mayor and I didn't have to say whether I was a Democrat or a Republican. And that wasn't really embedded in my fiber. What's embedded in our fiber is serving our community. That's what it's all about. So when you look at these individuals, they are not bad people. 4 of them did get elected. What was bad is that they ran together and some others didn't even have a chance because it was in the age of some real volatile political climate. And in the South, conservative is predominant. And so as soon as you say conservative, you automatically get some votes and it automatically becomes divisive to a certain extent. So like I said, these are good people. 4 of them did get elected. But just the way that the campaign was run was highly inappropriate. And now we'll get to the ugly. And the ugly, again, is that we ended up on the front of the New York Times, which I always wanted to be on the front of the New York Times. It's pretty cool. Not for this. But if you'll see there, my beautiful friend Joyce, and she may be on this call, but my beautiful friend Joyce ran for mayor. She ran against Rusty, who's on the card and on the other side. And she lost by 49 votes. And she killed it with campaigning. She killed it with her, with the forums, with the messages of love and unity and peace. And she is very, very bright and very committed to her community. But some folks that were campaigning for her opposition put some things out there that were pretty terrible. She had a financial misstep in her life that she didn't hide, but it's nothing you want to put out there on the front page of the newspaper. And someone thought it was a great idea to print something out, put it in people's mailbox. Other people on social media decided they wanted to spread information about it on social media. And it's very hurtful to a woman of just such integrity. It was literally, it was ugly. And so she has her own story to tell, and she's able to tell it in a lot of different contexts. But because of this, she didn't win the election, but she won. And when she left, she had her head held high. She has so much respect, and people are coming to her now, asking her to run for even higher offices. And I think she is very qualified to do so. The other ugly is just individuals that just say things that are downright mean. And this one person, I don't know her at all. I know some of her family member, but she referred to me as Hitler. I don't really understand where that comes in at all, but these are the things that get thrown out there. And so what do you do when you have all of this, just the mixed bag, and then you have to sit there in front of the whole community behind the dais with a gavel. Well, this is what I do. I put my Snoopy cartoons up there, and no one could see these but me and the council members. And this is a firm reminder to me that when people get up and they give me these rude, critical, argumentative comments, the best thing I can do is I will smile, I will thank them for their comment, and I will make sure to remind them that while they're well within their rights to speak here, really it's more productive for us to speak individually. And I typically invite people to coffee, and I will pay for it if they'll go. Some do, some don't. But also, thankfully, I have a lot of people who love me and who I love. And so that is just a great reminder. And I don't use the gavel very often. But while I've been sitting behind this dais, several things and really contentious issues have come my way, our way as a council. First was an international property maintenance code, and that's actually a link to a video of this whole town hall meeting that we had. And that was my first real exposure to how to listen to the public, and it just wasn't done well. John, you would cringe if you saw that. But all of these are just different issues that came before us that needed to be addressed in some shape, form, or fashion. The single asterisk indicates that we had town hall meetings, which people want to participate in, but they're often not productive. The double asterisks are public forums, and I'm going to talk about those a little bit. I know we're running a little short on time, so these are just some of the key issues. The first was a whopper. If you don't know much about a non-discrimination ordinance, this is an ordinance to ensure that your LGBTQ population is free from discrimination. And I had a group in town, the Monteval Acceptance Project, brought this to me and said, we would like to have an ordinance to ensure that we feel safe. And I said, of course, if we're a loving, embracing community, do we really need an ordinance? We already do this. Well, yeah, we need to know that it's a safe community, and we need to know we're free from discrimination. And I went, of course, everybody's going to love this. This is great. So got presented to me in January. I ran it by a couple folks, and they said, we need to work on this. So we had the first version of the ordinance presented to the city council in June of 2017. Again, I thought the city council would just say, yay, high five, let's do this, keep trucking along. That is not what happened. People came out of the woodwork against this, and they had, genuine concerns. And while I was very much for it, I had to recognize and really validate and try to understand their feelings. And so this timeline represents a lot of hard work we did in the community to bring people together. The first forum was a disaster, seriously. We planned for about 30 to 50 people. We ended up with 130. We didn't have the right space. We didn't have the right facilitators. It was rough. And so after that, I took some folks to breakfast. I took a group of folks for the ordinance to this cute little groovy coffee shop where we listened and talked, and I tried to understand what was important to them. Then I went to Huddle House with Fox News on the TV blaring with folks that were very much against it, and I listened to them. And then we had several other forums and ordinances, and then finally I had another breakfast, and I brought them together. I brought together fundamentalist Baptist preacher with my transgender friend, with just six individuals, and we sat and had breakfast. And what I said, the only rule I made, and I did pay for it so I could make the rule, was that we're not going to talk about the ordinance. We're just going to get to know each other. We want to know about you. And we did that. And when I left, that fundamentalist preacher and my transgender friend were standing there having coffee, laughing. And that is a win, as big as this ordinance is a win. So you see, it finally did pass. And we're still this loving community, but there were some things brought out that were hurtful, but also there were some issues that were very affirming. So I did just want to tell you, just show you how polarized it was, and you could look at these comments. One individual thinks it's contentious. The other individual thinks that it's inclusive, and they truly firmly believe in it. So, and this was my favorite forum that I've been a part of. But it resulted from a tragedy in our community. We had a couple of young men, African-American men, who were shot and killed over a very short time period. And this does not happen in Montevallo, Alabama. Thankfully, I can count on one hand how many people have been shot and killed in the community since I've lived here. I've been here 20 years, and I think that's about right. But the community was getting very, very upset about this, just all of the violence. It was tragic, and people in the community wanted to do something about it. And so a friend of mine came to me. It's actually my son's best friend's mom. And she came to me and she said, Holly, we have to do something about this. And I want to get people together, and we want to talk. And she's African-American, and it's more appropriate for someone in the community to lead that than it is for me to ride in on some white horse and try to lead some discussion when, and some folks may not feel like it's relevant to me. I feel like it's very relevant to me because I know these kids. I helped raise, many of these kids along with their mothers. So what we did is we decided we were going to have this forum, and then George Floyd got killed. Yeah. And so then you see some real civil, unrest. You see folks around the country very upset, but we're having this forum. We've invited people to a public housing area. And in the middle of COVID, when we had a curfew, it was just the most contentious time we've ever had in our history. And I told someone about this, another person in leadership in the city, and I said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to take these chairs, we're going to sit them out and very close to where the individual got killed, and we're going to put in circles, and we're going to have a different facilitator in each group, and we're going to present questions. The facilitator is going to help facilitate the discussion, and then each group is going to come and they're going to talk about, they're going to stand up and talk about their solutions, and then we're going to follow up. This person looked at me like I had two heads. They said, you're going to do this in the middle of what's going on? And I said, yep. And so my friend and I led this conversation, and you see both mayoral candidates are sitting here. My friend Joyce, my colleague Rusty Nix, who's our current mayor. And it was very beautiful. It was very productive. You see individuals who lived here were also here. Some of them didn't necessarily want to sit with us, but they were a big part of the planning because this is their home. We want to make sure they felt comfortable with it. So it was just a very productive discussion. And the other thing that I thought was really productive is I told them they're sitting in the same seats they would sit in if they were in City Hall, and that these are their chairs. So come sit in them at City Hall. And we have had more engagement since this. I mentioned that we worked with Kettering, that we've worked with the Kettering Foundation, and to talk about community politics and community politics exchange. And when we looked at that, what we were trying to identify is a problem in our community we can solve through dialogue. And we really looked at education. We have this great public liberal arts university, these wonderful schools, but we don't necessarily have this connectivity. So we started hosting these forums, and we thought the result of that would be everyone's going to jump up and down and say, we need preschool, we need free preschool. Well, what they really did is they jumped up and down and said, we need to have our Hispanic community more included. And so we came up with some pretty, I think, creative and intentional ways to include our Hispanic community. This is really the last slide that I have before I talk about some of the lessons we learned, but we also had found out through some historical research and in working with the Equal Justice Initiative that we did have some two lynchings on our main street and way in the late 1800s. And we also know in the state of Alabama and across the country, those are swept under the rug. And there can't be true reconciliation and healing until we acknowledge and address the issues that we've had in our community. And so we did erect this monument, this historic marker. And this, it wasn't without some conflict in the community. We did not have a dialogue session with this. We did have panel presentations, but I'm proud that we had it. I'm proud that we did have we did end up installing this. And, so the lessons learned, these are just lessons that I've learned, and John, you can critique me and let me know if this is right on point or not, but that you need to start with a small diverse group of stakeholders. If you open it up to a town hall with 200 people yelling at 5 people on a stage, it's not productive. You get nowhere. Prepare for larger crowds. It really was a nightmare. We had 130 people when we expected between 30 to 60. We always start with ground rules and we enforce those. And we learned that through the Matthews Center. They've just been a tremendous partner. I really can't brag on them enough. The goal there is not to change minds, but to broaden understanding of other people's perspectives. At the end of those forums, people didn't necessarily completely change their mind, but they understood each other. And that is so powerful. Also, it's important to document these discussions, publicize it, tell your story. And I love telling my story. Follow through is critical. And that is what I think we're known for in Montevallo, is getting things done and following through on all sorts of plans. Something will go wrong. We had in one of our forums, someone was critiquing what some young lady was wearing, and the young lady left crying, and it was just, something will go wrong. But sometimes you will be pleasantly surprised. And I think this is important to note, especially in Alabama, when we're not always known for great things. So we've brought people together in a really wonderful way, and I think we've accomplished a lot more than we expected to. So I just thank you for your time, and I hope I didn't go over. So thanks.
Not at all. Thank you so much for sharing, Holly, your experiences, having some conversations about difficult and divisive issues. It's easy to look at this stuff academically and theoretically, but I think it's so important to have those examples of communities who have actually done it, and that's going to have successes, failures, and a lot of times somewhere in between. So thank you for sharing. And at this time, I do want to open it for some questions. So you can either go to the participants tab and raise your hand, and I will call on you and unmute you. Or you can type your questions in the chat, and we'd be happy to answer them that way. But as people are getting their questions together, I wanted to see speakers. Were there any thoughts that came up during anyone else's presentation that you wanted to add on to, or that you had questions for each other about? All right. So we did have a question at the very beginning, John, about the polarization self-perpetuation graphic, and it was more just of sort of a general, they enjoyed the graphic. Could you talk a little bit more about the development of that and how you use that?
Yeah, thanks. It was developed by one of our founders, Maggie Herzig, when she was trying to understand one of the difficulties with breaking these cycles, that they tend to self-perpetuate. They feed themselves, and it's hard to break it. So one of the ways that we use it is to help people understand that there needs to be some disruption to the pattern of polarization, and part of that is bringing people back down to the complexity of who they are, back down to the different relationships and different things that they care about, and get them away from their single story. There's a wonderful TED Talk out there, The Danger of a Single Story. I recommend it to anybody. It's exactly that. None of us are single identities, care about a single thing, have a single belief. We all want to be known in the full complexity of who we are. The work of dialogue and of building relationships and building trust is about creating those connections again, to break the cycle of polarization so that you become the positive deviation from the escalating norm. You become the person in your group that says, no, don't talk about the person that way, or we're going to go march, but I'm going to ask you not to use that sign that says something so nasty about that other person that you're dehumanizing who they are, right? And so it's about building some of those connecting forces that disrupts the old pattern.
Absolutely. Thanks for that. We do have a question from our participant. Mino, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm Mino Akhtar, and I live in Emerson, New Jersey, which is a small town very close to Manhattan. We're actually known as a bedroom community. So the first question I actually have is, how do you build community in towns like these where we are really not there, to greet and talk with each other? That's the first question. And then when on top of it, with the, ecosystems that have been built up on social media, what opportunities do we have to bring this kind of conversation through those channels? I mean, sometimes I think that Facebook owes it to the world to create these, community forums. They should pay someone to facilitate and call people and invite them to these things. But yeah, building community, and then the whole virtual reality that has driven everybody mad. How are you all thinking about that? I'd love some comments and thoughts. Thank you.
And I'll just throw that out to any of our speakers. Feel free to chime in.
And before you do, I just wanted to let Courtney know I appreciate NCDD. I've been active with you guys, and I've been active with many interfaith circles in Bergen County in New Jersey, but it all seems so little. It seems so few, like we're preaching to the choir. So, there's a little bit of frustration I have as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Mino. I recognized your name as soon as I saw it. So, my thoughts, my 2 cents, is that a lot of it comes from us as community members reaching out to others we know and kind of helping to kind of build that community that's interested in having these conversations and building these connections. I think there's more interest in that than sometimes it looks, especially if we look at social media. I have myself extended family members with very different perspectives from myself, and we can engage in conversations on these tough topics, as long as we have desire to engage in these tough topics with one another. And we come to it from a place of respect of one another, because we're family, pardon me. I think, from there, it becomes who are we inviting in and who else can they invite in, and kind of building it upon that. I think some of it goes to thinking about where in the community is there already space. So it may be interfaith, it may be through schools, it may be through libraries, but I think it's kind of that looking at what are already the natural spaces where people are coming together, and looking at how, you can bring more folks into the fold. That's kind of my first thoughts, but I certainly welcome Holly and John to share too.
Thank you.
I would agree as far as identifying those spaces. It would not have been productive for us to have had that forum about the shootings at City Hall. Nobody would go. And then we tried that. We started with that, not with this forum, but with others. We've had forums. The library is an incredible place for folks to meet because they're already so comfortable there. And then I had a good friend of mine, actually, the one who ran for mayor. I asked her many years ago, I said, look, how do we get our Black community to come to these things? It's open, we want them there. And she said to me, I hope she doesn't mind me telling this story. She said, Holly, we're gonna come when you're talking about something that is important to us and when we feel welcome. And oh, wow, that was sort of a punch in the gut, but it was so enlightening and eye-opening. And I think that we evolved from that.
And I know we're getting a little short on time, but I did want to address the one question that we have here in the chat. So this question is about how do you invite dialogue between a municipality and a cultural community when the municipality is worried about participating because they don't want to be blamed or shamed during the process?
Well, as a representative of the municipality, I was never worried about being blamed or shamed because I was too worried about solving the problems. And so, but I do know that's a big part of it. And I think that when people want to bring a solution and let them know that they're going into this as partners and that everyone's going to share the responsibility of the planning and of the promotion and of leading the conversation, that's so helpful, rather than just having, the mayor doesn't need to be the one leading every conversation for sure. And so that was always helpful to me when people came to me with issues. And we truly partnered. It's not just lip service.
The other thing that you talked about in your experience, Holly, is that you did it one way where you had a sort of panel up on stage and people come out and this is what we hear in conversation with police. How do you get police into a conversation with the community? Well, if you put them on stage and give people an opportunity to just hurl insults at them, which is often the way police describe going to dialogues that they've been invited to, they're not going to want to go. If that's the experience, that I'm going to sit on this panel and people are going to stand up and criticize and blame me, people aren't going to want to go. If you can show them there's a different way to do this, we can sit and deeply listen. You can say difficult things to me. That's what I'm here to hear. But I want you to say it in a way that's to help me understand, to help me learn, not to blame me, shame me in public. And then I want to be able to share what my experience as well, so we can learn from each other and build trust for the next conversation. When you give people the experience of a different way of doing this, they're hungry to come out to a conversation like this, because the norm is just people abusing each other, either in print, social media, or in public.
Well, and I will just jump in real quickly. If you could see the photo that I put up, we have police officers that were interspersed throughout those groups, and they embedded themselves in the community. They wanted to be a part of the community. So it wasn't just the first time that these folks had ever seen these police officers. So the fact that they were willing to be a part of these conversations, I think was huge.
Absolutely. And I actually want to give one of our participants the opportunity to chime in. She has some insight on this question. Is it Leola?
It's Leola.
Leola, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. Dr. Leola Dublin Macmillan, United Way of San Luis Obispo County. Hi, everyone. Also, Happy New Year. Sorry. So I teach this stuff in higher ed, but also I do a lot of community education. And so that issue has come up. I live in an almost exclusively affluent white coastal California town. I don't know if you can see me. I'm neither affluent nor white. And so figuring out how to have these conversations and do these trainings and do this education in ways where people remain engaged requires that you make it clear from the inception, this is going to be a shame and blame free environment, and that this is a guilt-free environment. And so I just want to share with all of you the kind of 3 things that I do that make this even possible. So the first thing is I introduce folks to the notion of fictive kinship, which is both an African and an African American cultural retention. And I let them know that because of the particulars of chattel slavery, you had people who were in no way related in very compacted familial type spaces and structures. And they became family without being blood family, right? So that's fictive kinship. And that carries on today into the Black community, right? Everyone has like a play cousin, or she's my auntie, but she's not really my auntie. And so that's step 1, right? Introduce this notion to them and then just announce like, okay, this is a family reunion. For the entire time that we're here, that's your cousin, she's your auntie, that's your grandma. You don't like that side of the family, but it's okay, she's still your grandma, right? And do it in a lighthearted but serious manner. The second thing, sorry, John, I'm sorry. This is why they don't let me out much. The second thing that I do is review Dr. Martin Luther King's notion of the beloved community, right? And then I just ask the obvious question, which is like, oh, is there anything about this beloved community that you would not like to have? Really? Right? Who wouldn't want this? Why wouldn't they, right? Because then it gets them thinking about how all of us have this common goal. Like, we know what a harmonious society or community looks like, all of us. And we know what the distance is between where we are and that place. And if we can collectively agree on it, right, then we make sure that no one's being held accountable for that, right? Like we're all in the same place, not there. And then the third and most important thing I do is, especially when there's only white people in the audience, which is pretty common, I make the distinction and I tell them, I'm not asking you to assume responsibility for racism at all. There is no one alive today, as far as I'm aware, that is responsible, either individually or collectively, for structural racism. I'm asking you to be responsible for dismantling it, because if Black and brown people had the opportunity and the power to do so, we would have done it a while ago. We don't. Nobody, like, you're the superhero we need. Only you can do this. I don't care who started it, right? Like, and I've taught elementary school. I don't care. I don't care who started it. It has to stop. And then, like, we just have a good time. I teach barefoot a lot, but it's California, so that's kind of a hippie thing. But if that's useful, if any of that is useful, do it. And don't feel rushed to get into the meaty stuff. You know, get to know each other. Ask weird questions. Invite people to volunteer weird stuff about them, right? Demonstrate the familial thing. And then when, you know, someone says something and then someone else says something right behind that, you know, be like, hey, your cousin Jeff raised a great point. Did you hear what he said? Really, like, buy into that and reinforce it. We have a blast. People are like, what? I never. And I'm like, of course, duh.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really important point to remember, that all of this doesn't have to be hard and uncomfortable. If we make those relationships the right way that they should be and get to know each other, we can not only be productive, but have some fun with it as well. So thank you so much for sharing your on the ground experience and expertise with the group. I really appreciate it. I think that's a good place for us to wrap up here. I want to take a second to just give a special thank you to our presenters, Courtney, John, Holly. Thank you so much. You all were great. We appreciate your time and sharing of experience and expertise. To all of you who spent the hour with us, thank you for opening your minds and for your interest in hosting dialogues. I'll be sending out a follow-up email later this afternoon, as I mentioned, with slides, a recording, and some of the additional resources that were mentioned during today's call. I do believe that some individuals would like their email addresses shared with one another. If you would like that, just reply affirmative in the chat, and I will share those in a separate email with everyone. All right, and then last but not least, just stay out on the lookout for additional webinars from us. We will be holding these every month. And of course, if you're interested in the All-America City Award, please reach out to me directly. And with that, I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their days. Thank you so much, everyone.